Welcome to On The Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC 308, which goes down this weekend. It's a stacked pay-per-view, amazing fights. We're back in Abu Dhabi, and the best news is we're absolutely over that event from last weekend, which, of course, 13 fights. I think it was only one finish, which was a third round rear naked choke. There's question marks and people, it's a real talking point regarding the new UFC gloves as well. You've got fighters like Israel Adesanya that's apparently come out and said that the gloves are softer, that they don't hit as hard as the old ones. Then there's statisticians that I've seen providing data-driven analysis showing that although it is a small sample size, that the knockout rate since the new gloves have come in is significantly lower. We've got more decisions. So again, that'll be interesting once we pick up more data, once that sample size is greater. But yeah, we're over last weekend. We've got to look ahead to this weekend. And like I say, it's an absolutely phenomenal card. We've got 14 fights, I believe. I can already feel that this podcast is going to be quite long, but I'm just really excited pretty much about every single fight on this card. So yeah, I can't wait to jump in, break it down, and I can't wait to watch it. It's also going to be, for the UK and European fans, on a really good time as well. I'm not sure on the exact time, but it's going to be one of these late afternoon cards that finishes probably 11, 12 o'clock UK time, which is perfect. Unfortunately, it is a pay-per-view in the UK as well, but it's only 20 quid. When you consider that, every pay-per-view in the US, they're paying like $80, $90, every month for one pay-per-view. I think 20 quid is a one-off. I don't think we've had one of these for a while as well. I can't remember the last time that I had to pay 20 quid to watch a pay-per-view event. So it's not something that I'm overly concerned about. Like I say, it's a really good time for us. It's absolutely worth the money, and it's not as if it happens too often. So yeah, if you are down about it, chin up. We've got a really good card. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you like the fun gambling side of things, where you want to drop $10 and try and win $50 back or $100 back with a long shot parlays. If you want to create your own parlays, or if you want to use one of our pre-made parlays, we've got all that in the fun gamblers section. We've got recommended bets with full written breakdowns. We've got an official bet section, which is the bets that I physically part with my money on. And then, of course, all our subscription packages are inclusive with Bayes AI, our UFC prediction software, which gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every fight in the UFC every weekend. And that's all at MMAplay365.com. And here we go. You know what time it is, with the introduction out the way, with the promo out the way. Let's get into breaking these fights down, and we start with the main event. As always, it's a championship fight. We've got the UFC Featherweight Championship on the line. We've got Ilia Topuria versus Max Blessed Holloway. And man, what a fight this is. I love that the UFC are giving Holloway another shot at the title as well, because Holloway had that time in his era where he just couldn't beat Aleksandar Volkanovski. He tried and tried again, and it just seemed to have been a complete, it was Holloway and Volkanovski was a million miles away from every other fighter in the division at that time. But the issue for Holloway is Volkanovski was so far away from him, so it was almost like Max would smash absolutely everybody in the division, and he would be that rightful title shot challenger. But then he couldn't beat Volkanovski. But now there's a new champion. Styles make fights, so it's not as if just because Topuria beat Volkanovski that Holloway's going to have even more trouble against Topuria than he did Volkanovski. And I actually think the opposite, Like I say, styles make fights. And even though Holloway couldn't beat Volkanovski, or, he was running very close to it but just never got over the line, I think Topuria is a more simple fight for Holloway than what Volkanovski was. And again, I'm not saying that Topuria is going to lose this fight. I just think that Topuria and Volkanovski are two completely different fighters. Where Volkanovski was difficult for Holloway is the fact that Volkanovski could keep up with the pace of Holloway for 5 hard rounds. Volkanovski had, he was so well-rounded everywhere, and I know Ilia Topuria is as well, but Volkanovski also had a ton of volume over those 5 rounds, which is where I think that Volkanovski and Topuria is different because although Topuria is not low volume, it's just Volkanovski, he had that engine where he would just go and go and go, and he could put up a ton of strikes. He was technically sound and there would be no moments of inactivity. He was just filling all empty moments in the fight, if you like, with volume, whereas Topuria is very different, and you actually saw that when Topuria beat Volkanovski. Bear in mind, I bet Topuria at plus money to beat Aleksandar Volkanovski. But you go back and watch Topuria and Volkanovski, that first round was Topuria landing probably the harder shots, but Volkanovski actually won that round, I believe, on pretty much I think it was all 3 scorecards. I could be wrong about that, but he was definitely up after round 1. And that was because of the activity levels, because he was a skilled striker. He was landing on Topuria. And yeah, look, Topuria was building into the fight, and he ended up catching Volkanovski and knocking him out. And look, that is something that I do think that Holloway could get caught with in this fight, because for as good as Holloway is, for how active he is, the volume, the pressure, all that good stuff, he can get hit. And even in the Korean Zombie fight, you saw Holloway get hit, and you just think that, look, if that's Topuria landing on Holloway instead of the Korean Zombie, Holloway probably gets knocked out in that situation. So Holloway's got to fight a little more secure in this fight. He can't go in here and think that he's going to be able to take the punches of what he did against the Korean Zombie or what he did against, even Aleksandar Volkanovski. For as good as he is, he doesn't have really that one punch KO power, whereas Topuria absolutely does. So Holloway's got to be he's got to be cautious in this fight, whereas in other fights he's not had to overthink about being cautious. Now, the other thing with Topuria, aside from him being a powerhouse striker, everything that he throws is super hard and he can knock you out at any time in any round, is the wrestling and the grappling. Like, he's a high-level grappler, and his wrestling he's got good wrestling to go with that as well. The issue is against Holloway. The issue that every fighter's ever had in this regard is that Holloway's got this godlike takedown defense, and if for some reason you do happen to get Holloway down, you ain't keeping him down because he'll pop right back up to his feet. So from where the fight's won and lost, that perspective, it's going to be won and lost on the feet striking. And like I say, you've got Topuria, who's got the power strikes behind him. You've got Holloway that's got this insane volume and pressure game. And I just think it's going to be a close fight. And look, when you look at the betting lines, the last time I looked, I think Topuria was like minus 225, in some spots minus 250. I think the line's too wide. Yeah, absolutely. Look, Topuria should be the favourite. And it's a little 6 and 2/3 because if Topuria was sitting at minus 150, well, that line would probably last about 20 minutes, half an hour at the most, and then he'd be back up to like minus 225, minus 250 again. So even though I do believe the line's wide, the line's settled where it is. And like I said, I don't think it can be shorter, even though I think it's too wide. And I know that's, a contradictory statement. But like I say, if it was shorter at like minus 150, it would just get absolutely steamed back up to where it is now. So the line settled where it is. I do think it's a little bit too wide. I think when you're looking at this fight from a betting perspective, I think the value is absolutely on Max Holloway, because you can't forget that he's still an elite fighter. He's still going to put up, if this fight goes 5 rounds, Max Holloway is going to be putting out like 150 to 200 significant strikes landed, probably on about 400 strikes thrown. So Holloway's still going to have like significant advantages in the volume. He's still an elite fighter. He's still a fighter that's going to pressure. It's just at some point, I think Topuria is going to hurt Holloway, and that's why. Look, I do think Topuria is rightfully favoured. He's a younger fighter. He's just starting his journey as the champion. I think he's going to be a champion for quite a long time as well. He's one of these fighters that's going to be tough to beat just because he's so good everywhere. He's so dangerous. He can finish on the feet. He can finish via submission. He's got no real weaknesses apart from he might be able to get out-volumed by some high-volumed fighters and strikers, and Max Holloway's one of them. So that's why I think the fight's going to be really, really close. If it goes to a decision, if this fight goes to a decision, it could be a very, very close decision, maybe a split decision. We might not know who's won the fight unless Topuria absolutely just destroys Holloway, lights him up, but doesn't get him out of there. If that's not how the fight goes, then yeah, it's going to be close, and Holloway might win a volume heavy decision. But I do think Topuria, whether he finishes him or not, I do think that he's going to land hard on Holloway, either hurt him to the point where it changes the course of the fight and Topuria can take over. Holloway might get a little bit hesitant with the power coming at him, or Topuria might even knock Holloway out in that scenario. But whichever way I look at this fight, whether it is close and goes to a close decision or whether it is a one-sided fight, which I don't think it's going to be. But I just can't help but see Topuria having his hand raised at the end of the fight. I think that, like I say, he's going to be a long reigning champion. I'm not convinced that he absolutely goes out there and makes it look great and easy against Holloway, but there's something about Topuria. I just feel that he is going to get this job done, whether it's difficult for him or whether he does show that he's at a ridiculous elite level. So for all the reasons mentioned and discussed, I'm picking Ilia Topuria to win this fight and still the UFC featherweight champion. And in the next fight, this is a rescheduled fight. We should have had it a few weeks ago, or it might have been a couple of months ago now. Time moves that fast. We've got Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev. Now, like I say, this fight should have happened before, but if you remember, it was Khamzat Chimaev, I believe, that pulled out, and then Robert Whittaker ended up fighting Aleksandar. Or there might have been a couple of changes. I can't really remember. Maybe Chimaev pulled out, Whittaker got another opponent, and then that opponent pulled out. But it was Whittaker that was supposed to, at some point, have fought Khamzat Chimaev on a scheduled fight, but then ended up fighting Aleksandar. And look, that Robert Whittaker and Aleksandar fight, it was a bet from me. I bet Robert Whittaker. I think I got him at like -130, -135, something like that. And it was probably one of the easiest cashes that you'll ever get. You know, he was night and day levels above Aleksandar. I didn't like having money against Aleksandar. I've got to admit, you know, Dagestani, powerhouse, good wrestling, good grappling. But the bottom line is he'd never fought somebody like Robert Whittaker, and it showed. And Whittaker made it look easy, knocked him out, easy cash. And now you've got Khamzat Chimaev. And look, anybody that's been following me for a long time, I was one of the first people to really be high on Chimaev when he came into the UFC, because I heard about him a couple of years prior to that, when he was in a different promotion. I think it was Brave, and I heard that, look, this guy's like an absolute monster and one to keep your eye on in a few years' time. And to the point where it was that long prior that I heard about him, that when he actually came into the UFC, I thought, I recognise that guy, because I met him in Sweden a number of years before he came to the UFC, and I thought, I recognise that guy and I recognise the name, and I couldn't piece it. And then it came to me, I was like, oh shit, that's Khamzat Chimaev, who I was with in Sweden, that everybody was raving about at the time. So look, with Chimaev, I've been high on Chimaev for a long time. He's an absolute monster, deceptively strong. Every single person that goes to train with him comes back and says the same thing, that he's just an absolute dog. He's, you know, much stronger than he looks. He's throwing heavyweights around at the gym. So look, Chimaev is one of these fighters, like I say, I've been high on for a long time. I think he's a nightmare opponent for everybody. But I just can't help think that everything I thought about Aleksandar, and again, I'm not as high on Aleksandar as I am Chimaev, but all the things stylistically that I was thinking about Aleksandar and the Robert Whittaker fight, I'm kind of finding myself on that side again here. Like with Khamzat, like Khamzat will look to wrestle and grapple. That's where he's absolutely strong. He's sure he can knock you out as well, but his wrestling and grappling is where he's absolutely strongest. And he will be able to get at Robert Whittaker early in this fight, I think. I genuinely believe that. But the thing is, not only is Whittaker the best fighter that Chimaev's ever fought, Whittaker's like at a ridiculous elite level for this division. Obviously, this fight's at 185 pounds at middleweight. And arguably the best fighter that Chimaev has fought to date is Kamaru Usman. But the thing is, Kamaru Usman, I believe, stepped up on short notice to fight Chimaev and up a weight class as well. It was the first time Usman had ever fought at middleweight. And look, you can't say he was massively undersized. Usman's always been, you know, a physical specimen at welterweight. But the bottom line is, Usman was carrying more weight than he's ever been used to fighting with before. And it was on short notice. And the thing is, you go back and watch that fight, Chimaev destroyed him in round 1, 10-8 rounds across the board. But then you look at rounds 2 and 3, Chimaev's cardio fell off. Chimaev started to be tired because of the work rate that he'd put on in the first round. And then rounds 2 and 3 started to get a little bit sketchy, and then he's winning a majority decision. So it wasn't even like a unanimous decision, it was a majority decision that he won. And I truly, truly believe that if that fight was 5 rounds against Usman, Chimaev loses that fight, because he'd got to a point where his takedowns weren't happening as much as what they used to. He wasn't able to get Usman down as easy as before. Usman was defending the takedowns. If he was taken down, Usman was getting back up quicker than he did before. Then Usman's landing harder punches on Chimaev. Usman's the fresher fighter. And I think if there's another 2 rounds in that fight, either Usman steals those rounds and wins the fight, probably by split decision, or Usman finishes him late. And the thing is, even though Usman's still an elite fighter, he's not the fighter he was 3 or 4 years ago. He's a fighter that is on a slow decline. You look at Robert Whittaker, I don't think Whittaker's on a slow decline. Whittaker's a natural middleweight, an elite middleweight, and former champion, championship experience. And more importantly, he's got the cardio to go over 5 rounds. Hard over 5 rounds without slowing down. And this is where the most vital point of this fight is for me. This is one of these 5-round co-main event fights. So this isn't 3 rounds. If this was 3 rounds, I think Chimaev beats Whittaker. I think this a similar thing to Usman. I think Chimaev can dominate round 1, squeak round 2, probably drop round 3 and win a decision. But I think over 5 rounds, it absolutely changes this fight completely and puts it into Robert Whittaker's favour because, like I say, I think Chimaev will have a good first round. But the thing is with Whittaker is like his wrestling defense isn't an elite level. His grappling's at an elite level. He's the miles better striker in this fight. I think for Chimaev to win this fight, he's got to finish Whittaker early, and that's a possibility. Chimaev comes out fast, he comes out hard, he's got knockout power, and if he does get the fight down to the mat, either a TKO or sliding his forearm in under the chin, over the throat, and getting a rear naked choke, those are possibilities. But the thing is, again, you go back to Whittaker, he's an elite former champion with championship experience, and it's like, does he really get finished by Chimaev early in this fight in round 1 or early in round 2? I don't see it. It's a possibility, but I'm not gonna stake a solid prediction on Chimaev getting Whittaker out there early. And therefore, what I expect to happen the longer the fight goes on is Chimaev starts to get more tired, starts to get more desperate, starts to look for the big shots that now is not finding Whittaker because Whittaker's technical striking is just unbelievably good. And then Chimaev shooting for takedowns that he's just not securing. He's tired. He's shooting from a bit too far out. Whittaker takes over. I absolutely hate this prediction because I don't think I've ever even picked against Chimaev winning a fight. But I think this is the first one I'm going to do because stylistically it just seems like a little bit of a problem fight for Chimaev. And like I say, the 5 rounds is the key element in this fight. If it was 3 rounds, I would be picking Chimaev. But 5 round changes the dynamic completely. Then you look at the reports on Chimaev. Ever since he got COVID during the COVID era, he's had we've had reports of him, having injuries, illnesses. This is his first fight in a year. And that last fight a year ago was his first fight in over a year as well. So the activity, he's not an active fighter. When he came into the UFC, he was breaking records for how much he was fighting. I think there probably is something in the injuries and the illnesses. There's a reason why he's only fighting once a year. I just think the upside's on Whittaker. So yeah, look, like I say, I absolutely hate this pick. I hate this prediction because, look, that's nothing against Whittaker. I'm just so high on Chimaev, and I think he's a super exciting fighter. I think he's a dangerous fighter. I think he's a nightmare opponent for any fighter. So I hate the prediction, but I am siding with Whittaker. I'm picking Robert Whittaker to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Lerone Murphy versus Dan Ige. And I think this is a really good fight. Look, from Lerone Murphy's perspective, it was an absolutely phenomenal performance against Edson Barboza. That was an Edson Barboza that was causing a lot of problems for these types of fighters. Barboza in this division is almost like the ultimate gatekeeper, and I don't mean that in any disrespect whatsoever because he's still fighting at an elite level. But what I mean by gatekeeper is, look, Barboza's going to be a tough step for any fighter, any young fighter on the way up. If you can beat Barboza, then you can progress into the, comfortably into the rankings, potentially enter into the top 10. If you can't beat Barboza, then you're just not ready yet. And Lerone Murphy beat Barboza, beat him comfortably, and looked phenomenal in doing so. And not many fighters have looked that good, by the way, against Barboza in Barboza's entire career. So Lerone Murphy is definitely on a trajectory where he is going to be hitting the top of the division soon. And I think Dan Ige is a perfect step forward from Barboza because, Ige is a fighter that's still in his prime. I don't think there's any decline there, whereas with Barboza there is slight decline, but Ige's a good striker, good wrestler, good grappler, is a full package, and I think this is the next step and challenge for Lerone Murphy. Let's see where you're at against a Dan Ige, who has also been in there with, top fighters in the division over many years, and it's I would say it's a slight step up from Barboza, but it's just a completely different style of opponent. And look, with Ige, I think that I think this is going to be a close fight. Again, it's not a cop-out me saying that. I think that the striking is going to be edged on Murphy's side. I think Murphy's going to be the slightly better striker here. But when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, I think that Ige's got a good base with the wrestling and grappling, whereas Lerone Murphy, look, defensively is fine. He can defend takedowns, he can get back up to his feet, but I just think it's going to be one of these fights where the striking's quite close, edges to Murphy, and then Ige's going to mix in a takedown here and there, but then maybe Murphy stands back up and maybe it's 3 or 4 takedowns over the course of the fight, but there's nothing really done with the takedowns, but there's been enough of them to sort of maybe drop a question mark in the judge's mind of, okay, well, yeah, Ige's maybe been outstruck, but he has been successful in the wrestling. I just think it's going to be one of these really close fights where, maybe the judges are looking at a little bit of pressure and the wrestling side, and Ige shooting a takedown, Murphy standing back up, and then there's a little bit of cage control time for Ige. It shouldn't fucking matter at all, but these judges just seem to score whatever they want to score now. The official rule set states that effective striking and grappling is the first criteria in the rule set. But then judges decided to sort of throw that out a little bit and say, look, we're looking for damage. That's fine, no problem at all. But then they're scoring fights to Mario Bautista against Jose Aldo when Bautista's just holding against the cage. So, good luck if you want to try and predict what the judges are looking for. So in this fight, I don't think it's going to be exactly like the Aldo and Bautista fight because Dan Ige doesn't have that style, but I think if Ige is shooting takedowns and maybe looking to pin Murphy against the cage a little bit, then we could see that maybe type of close fight. But I do think Murphy's going to do the better work on the feet striking. I think the fight's going to be won and lost on the feet striking. And I think this is going to be a really good fight for Lerone Murphy to get his hand raised, step up to the next level again. And let's see how far he can go, because he's turning into a little bit of a dark horse in this division now. And I think a win over Dan Ige on a card like this is going to put his name up there with the best in the division. And if he wins this fight, I guarantee the next fight is going to be a real high-level elite fight for Murphy. The UFC will be like, right, let's see exactly where you're at with the top of the division. And yeah, look, I think Lerone Murphy's going to, like I say, I think he's going to do good work striking in a fight that's going to be won and lost on the feet striking. So for those reasons, I'm picking Lerone Murphy to win this fight. And in the next fight in the UFC light heavyweight division, you've got to assume this has got light heavyweight title shot implications within the fight. We've got Magomed Ankalaev versus Aleksandar Rakic. Now, when I say the title implications, I am sort of meaning that of if Ankalaev wins this fight. He's a 4-1 favourite, he's a heavy favourite. Whereas if Rakic wins, I think Rakic would still need another couple of wins before he's even considered for a title fight, just because he's coming off a loss, or he's coming off 2 losses. The Blachowicz one was tough because it was just a fluke freak injury, but the Yuri Prohatska loss was a legitimate loss. So yeah, maybe if Rakic wins this fight, he'll need a couple more. But if Ankalaev wins this fight, I just don't know how the UFC can refuse Ankalaev that title fight. I don't know how he hasn't had one already. I really don't understand it at all, to the point where I'm thinking, well, what other reasons could he have for not having a title fight? Do the UFC think that he's the person to beat Alex Pereira? Maybe Ankalaev's got visa issues. I don't know. I'm not even speculating. I'm just, trying to think of any possible reason to why Ankalaev has not had that title fight already. Having Roundtree fight over Ankalaev, listen, props to Roundtree. So much fucking respect for that guy for what he did against Pereira. But, from the rankings perspective, Ankalaev, it should have been Ankalaev. But back to this fight. Look, Ankalaev, like I say, is a big favourite. And at the time of recording this podcast, I think he's like -400. Aleksandar Rakic is +300. And look, regardless of how you predict this fight, I cannot help looking at that number of Aleksandar Rakic at +300 and think, well, fuck, that's a number. Like, that's a big underdog in this fight for a very high level fight. And I know Rakic is coming off 2 losses. The Blachowicz loss, again, I don't put too much stock into. He was also looking good in that fight until the freak injury. The Prochazka fight, he was absolutely styling on Prochazka until Prochazka started landing punches on Rakic. And look, like I say, this is a high-level fight at the top of the division. To have a plus 300 underdog in this fight, in my opinion, is fucking nuts. But with that being said, like, you look at how Rakic can beat Ankalaev. I think Rakic has got one tool and weapon that he has to use in this fight. If he doesn't, I think it's over for him. I don't think he wins. He's got to kick Ankalaev's legs. Look at what Blachowicz did to Ankalaev. The fact that Ankalaev wasn't already the champion that night against Blachowicz was because Blachowicz was absolutely blasting Ankalaev's legs. And bear in mind, Ankalaev was in a southpaw stance, Blachowicz was in an orthodox stance, so the same stances of what we're going to get here with Ankalaev and Rakic. If Rakic starts taking that leg away of Ankalaev and early in this fight, this isn't 5 rounds for Ankalaev to come back and steal the late rounds against Rakic. Also, Rakic has got good wrestling as well, so even if Ankalaev's legs are hurting, I don't think Ankalaev will be able to do to Rakic what he did to Blachowicz in regards to, shooting and taking him down and controlling him on the mat. Rakic is better than that. I do think that Rakic can be able to defend the wrestling and grappling here. Where I really like Ankalaev, though, is the fact that he can potentially mix in some takedowns just to break up the flow at the very least. He might even score a couple. I just don't think the fight's going to be won and lost with the wrestling and grappling is what I'm trying to say. But Rakic is super hittable. His head stays on the centre line. He comes in with his chin up when he's striking in combinations, and that's dangerous against Ankalaev because Ankalaev's a tough motherfucker that will be able to take strikes from Dagestan. Like, you'd never really see these guys in too much danger in regards to being rocked and wobbled. Yes, he has been dropped before, but was he in serious danger? I don't think so. And yeah, look, I think that Rakic has got to be really careful when exchanging because if he leaves his chin out there, Ankalaev's going to find it and he's going to knock him out. But I just think that the fight's going to be really close. Like, you look at, it's not as if Ankalaev's has been super dominant in every single one of his fights. He's had a lot of close decisions. He went to a close decision with Thiago Santos. Thiago Santos dropped him. That was the fight that I referenced when he's been dropped. Aleksandar Rakic, he beat Thiago Santos without getting hurt. So, look, it's a high-level elite fight in the division. I do think Ankalaev is the best fighter in the division. I still stand by that. I think if he fights Alex Pereira, I think the wrestling and grappling will be too much, as long as Ankalaev went there. But I think Ankalaev is still the best fighter in the division. I think as soon as he gets his title shot, he wins. For that reason, I think he beats everybody else in the division, which includes Aleksandar Rakic as well. But if Rakic game plans this really well, starts smashing the low kicks, takes that any sort of base and power away from Ankalaev, we've seen Ankalaev hurt to the legs before, and Rakic's leg kicks are absolutely devastating. So, if that's Rakic's game plan, this could, we could end up seeing an upset. And look, there's a few fights on this card where I think we're going to get a couple of big upsets here. There's a couple of underdogs. There's I would say maybe 4 or 5 underdogs on this card that have got absolutely every chance of winning the fight. Decent size underdogs. I think Holloway's got a decent chance of winning, even though I think, I've picked Topuria. I think Rakic is another one of them as well. I'm picking Ankalaev to win the fight, but I think that Rakic at plus 300 could be a big upset on the night. There's a few others as well that I won't spoil just yet, but I definitely think there's going to be a couple of big upsets on this card. Rakic might be one of them. With that being said, I am siding the other way. I do think Ankalaev's the best fighter in the division, and I do think he's, aside from Alex Pereira, I think he is levels above everybody else in the division as well, which does include Rakic. It's just stylistically, styles make fights. Rakic might be able to, to take the legs out of Ankalaev. So, yeah, look, tough fight, close fight. I think the plus 300 nuts on Rakic, but I'm picking Magomed Ankalaev to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is going to be a fun striking fight. We've got Shara Magomedov versus Armen Petrosyan. Now, this is a really good fight just for the point of, I think Shara Magomedov is just sick of fighting fighters that want to try and take him down. And I think Armen Petrosyan's exactly the same. Like, they're both predominant strikers, and especially with Petrosyan, he's been took down numerous times in numerous fights. And I think from Petrosyan's perspective specifically, I think he's got a really good fight here against Shara Magomedov in regards to, I just don't think Shara Magomedov's going to shoot a single takedown at all. And actually on the flip side, even though I think it's going to be a good striking war, I would not be shocked at all to see Petrosyan come in here and take Shara Magomedov down. And I say that for two reasons. Look, Shara Magomedov, for as fun as what he is, and I actually, by the way, think he gets a lot of shit from MMA fans that sort of undervalue him. And I don't think he should be in that type of conversation. I think he's a solid fighter. Sure, he's got holes in his game, just like 99.9% of fighters. But I still think he's like a quality striker. But I even saw a video, not on his last fight, it was the fight before, on Twitter with somebody like shitting on the strike in one of the combinations and saying that he's not even a great striker. Well, he is. Like, he's a very, very good striker. He's fast, he's accurate, he's got power, and I do think that he's going to be a difficult fighter to beat. However, he's got the holes in his game. The wrestling, even though you can see it's getting better from fight to fight, can still be an issue for him. His grappling, even though you can see it getting better from fight to fight, can still be an issue. Where it becomes a big issue with the wrestling and grappling is late in fights, because he outputs that much speed, movement and volume. He does tire late when it goes into round 3. You can see that he's absolutely nowhere near as fresh as what he was, and that's when, if his opponent's shooting takedowns, he's unable to defend the takedowns as good as what he would when he's fresh, when he's got a full tank of gas. And then another reason I think Petrosyan might shoot here is I believe Petrosyan trains with Dagestanis, even though he's a kickboxer, so he's going to get good looks within the wrestling and the grappling within his trading partners. So I think that sneakily Petrosyan might come into this fight with a wrestling and grappling game plan. However, until you see that, it's hard to be overly confident in it, because when we're breaking fights down from, what we've seen in previous fights. And what we've seen in previous fights is Petrosyan doesn't really want anything to do with the wrestling and grappling. But it's just something in the back of my mind. It's a gut feeling that maybe Petrosyan comes into this fight, doesn't really like the striking coming back at him from Magomedov, and potentially looks to take him down. And if he gets a takedown and has a bit of success topside early in this fight, he's going to rinse and repeat it. Look what happened last weekend with Austin Lane and Rebelis Despain. Like, Rebelis Despain, Austin Lane, both predominant strikers, but Austin Lane didn't like the striking coming from Despain, so he decided to try and take him down. He took him down, he got on top of him, he had good success, good control time, and thought, well, this is how I'm going to win this fight, and then went back to it. I think the same thing could happen with Petrosyan, but like I say, it's more of a gut feeling than like solid analysis. Where I actually see this fight taking place and having the bigger moments is on the feet striking, because they're both predominantly strikers. And I think Petrosyan's got a good level of kickboxing. I think he's more defensively sound than Magomedov, but I think Magomedov's speed and movement is crazy fast, and I think that Petrosyan is going to be at a significant speed advantage in this fight, whereas the technical striking I think is quite even across both fighters. I don't think there's a real edge there, but I think the real edge is, like I say, within the speed and the movement. And when you've got two strikers that are similar in skill set and quality of striking, but one of them's faster and moves better, both with the striking and the speed, both with the striking and the movement, the speed being faster, I think that's the fighter that's going to have the edge in the striking, because that's the fighter that's going to be moving a bit more, harder to hit, but also landing more volume as well. I think the way this fight goes is Magomedov's going to do really well in round 1. He's going to do really well in round 2, apart from maybe the last 30 to 60 seconds when he might be slowing down, but still win that round because of all the work that he's done prior to that last 30 to 60 seconds. And then he's probably going to be at the end of, when it comes to round 3, he's going to probably drop that round, is the way I'm predicting this fight to go, and then win 29-28 across the board. Even if the fight's close, it's a split decision. We're in Abu Dhabi, which is that side of the world for Magomedov. So, yeah, look, I think that I don't think there's going to be a knockout. Both fighters are super tough. I don't think either fighter, unless it's like a clean head kick knockout or something like that just sneaks through, I think it's going to be a really fun striking fight that goes the full 3 rounds. But I just think Magomedov's going to win the opening 2 rounds, and even if he doesn't drop round 3, even if he manages to squeak that as well, that'd still be a unanimous decision win for him. So yeah, I think 29-28 is fair. I'm picking Shara Magomedov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Geoff Neal versus Rafael dos Anjos. So this is another one of those fights. I mentioned it earlier in the breakdown between Ankalaev and Rakic. This is another one of those fights where I'm going to be picking one side, but I think there's value on the underdog. And I don't think there's as much value on Rafael dos Anjos, who is the underdog, as other underdogs, but I still think he's live in this fight for what the odds are suggesting. Last time I looked, I think Dos Anjos was like plus 200. So I definitely think there's value on Dos Anjos in this fight, but it's hard to really pick him. Like he's up and down with the weight divisions, and that's one of the first sort of red flags, because I feel like, you know, he was always a lightweight, and then he stepped up at welterweight. He had a few successful fights there, but then he fought the top of the division and realised that actually, you know, when the skill set is there or thereabouts, and then they've got the physical advantages as well, it's too much for him. Then he drops back down to lightweight. He has a couple at lightweight, and then it kind of doesn't work out for him. Now he's back up at welterweight, and he's just up and down all the time. I just don't think he can settle on what's right for him. And then when you look at Geoff Neal's big for the division as well, and he's powerful. So again, you look at the Rafael Dos Anjos fight against Vicente Luque. Look, I bet RDA in that fight against Luque. I thought it was a really good fight for him. Luque on a bit of a decline. But man, Luque dominated RDA, and at RDA's own game as well. Now, when you look at Geoff Neal hasn't really got a ton of recent fights where he's absolutely smoking like high-level competition. So it's not as if like he's levels above RDA and beating fighters levels above him. Like, again, the argument is for Neal, the best, the best opponent that he's beaten was this version of Vicente Luque. You know, he absolutely beat the brakes off him. And again, I bet Geoff Neal in that fight as well. I think it was like plus 170 or something crazy like that. But that's Geoff Neal's best win. However, it's that version of Luque that also dominated RDA. So this is why I kind of have to pick Geoff Neal. But it just wouldn't surprise me if RDA just turned up in this fight, you know, decided to grind on Neal against the cage, maybe score a few takedowns, maybe sink a hook in against the side of the cage, try and take the back. But the flip side to that is, you know, Neal's going to be much more physical. He's not got bad takedown defense either. I do think if he's taken down, RDA might be able to do some good work, but it's the getting him down that's going to be the problem. And I'm not sure RDA gets him down too often. And then on the feet striking, yeah, look, RDA can strike, but I just think everything that Neal lands on RDA, he's just going to hit that little bit harder. And again, does RDA get a little bit hesitant of coming in trying to close the distance if he's at a physical disadvantage with the strength, and then he's also getting hit with some hard punches on his way in as well? So this is what I mean. I definitely think, look, if RDA wins this fight, am I going to be shocked? No, I don't think anybody should be, because skill set wise, I think RDA is a more skilled fighter than Neal. It's just the physical advantages in this weight class, with Neal being so much bigger, stronger, more powerful. It matters for something. Like, there's weight classes are there for a reason. So that's why I'm sort of like, look, RDA's live from a skill set perspective, but it's Geoff Neal's weight class, and he's big for the weight class as well. So I'm having a hard time with RDA actually picking him, but I do think that, you know, if you're looking to bet this fight, I do think that, you know, the values on RDA's side opposed to Neal's. But with that being said, I'm picking Geoff Neal to win this fight. And in the next fight, it's another one of these fights where I'm picking the favourite, but I think the value is with the underdog. We've got Myktybek Orolbai versus Mateusz Rebecki. Now, Rebecki's a fighter I like a lot. Yeah, he fell short last time out, but he fell short against one of these, you know, Brazilian veterans. And, you know, you look at your, like I say, you've said it before, your Edson Barbosas, your Jose Aldos, and like your Diego Ferreiras. Like, these fighters that have been around for years are experienced at the highest level, and they are going to catch fighters out. And I think Rebecki was just caught out by, you know, a very experienced Brazilian savvy veteran in Diego Ferreira. Now, against Myktybek Orolbai, it's a different type of fighter. Now, Orolbai is an absolute beast, by the way. He's huge for the division. He's got knockout power, loves his wrestling, he's got good grappling. And this is ultimately why I'm going to be picking him to win the fight, because, again, when it comes to size and strength, I do think it's going to look like there's a weight class difference between both fighters. Even though Rebecki is going to be, you know, lower center of gravity, is going to be physically strong as well, I just think that Orolbai is going to be a little bit more physical. And when it comes to the wrestling, I think that it's going to be Orolbai that's the more offensive wrestler in this fight, which is going to matter. If Rebecki gets on top of Orolbai, look, Rebecki's jiu-jitsu is really underrated. Like, he's fought in jiu-jitsu tournaments. He's a legitimate BJJ player. Reminds me a little bit like a smaller version of Dolidze, if I'm being honest. But Rebecki's jiu-jitsu is really good. If you can get on top of Orolbai, maybe tire him out a little bit. Look, we saw Orolbai get swept, reversed against Elvis Brenner. And Orolbai, even though he started well, he had the sketchy moments in the middle of the fight. So I don't think that Elvis Brenner is a better fighter than Rebecki. I think Rebecki is the better fighter there. And also with the wrestling and grappling, I think Rebecki is going to be more physical and more dominant than Brenner as well. So I think Rebecki is going to absolutely have his moments in this fight. I just really like Orolbai as a fighter. I think that, like I say, he's got power in his hands. He's got a good technical striking as well. And then his wrestling can be relentless, and he's got decent grappling. It's just like I say, we've seen him slow down and we've seen him make some questionable decisions. And it's this type of fight that, again, we've got a relatively sized underdog in Rebecki, who I think is absolutely live. I think if Rebecki gets on top of Orolbai, he's going to be able to do good work. Rebecki's got good pressure himself, throws heat. I think it's a well-matched fight. And in a well-matched fight, on one side, we've got a big underdog. So that underdog's always going to be live. But again, I just think Orolbai is going to be a bit of a nightmare fighter to beat at this level. Of course, once he starts getting to the top 10 and 15, it's a different ball game. But right now, outside of the top 15, sort of around this top 20, 30 range, I think Orolbai is going to be a real problem and be super difficult to beat. So that's why I'm on the side of Orolbai. But like I say, from a betting perspective, I think if you're looking for value, if the value bet's the way that you're going, I think Rebecki's the value side. Again, with that being said, I'm picking Myktybek Orolbai to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Said Nurmagomedov versus Daniel Santos. Now, I think this is going to be one of the easier fights to break down. Said Nurmagomedov was sitting at around like minus 240, minus 250, but I think he's been steamed up past minus 300 now, which I completely understand. I was kind of anticipating it getting that far. And look, to break it down really simply, I just struggle to see where Daniel Santos is actually going to have success in this fight because, look, for a start, Daniel Santos is super fun, super aggressive, high pace, will eat a punch to deliver 3 himself. If it means eating 3 to land 2 hard, he'd probably take that as well. He's got a decent grappling game. His wrestling's okay as well. He's just a real live wire inside the cage, I think is the right adjective for him. But the thing is, live wire, fun to watch, entertaining, doesn't win your fights against somebody as technically sound as Said Nurmagomedov. So it's really simple as this. When it comes to the striking, does Daniel Santos get the better of Said Nurmagomedov? Well, do I think he lands on him? Yes, I do. Do I think he knocks him out? No. Do I think that he lands more volume on him? No. I just think that Santos will have some success on the striking just because he is forward pressure, aggressive, and will throw heat. It's a fist fight. He's going to punch Nurmagomedov in the face at some point. But obviously there's a greater depth of fight and fight analysis than just that. And I think Said Nurmagomedov's this highly skilled striker, way more technical than Santos. And I think because of that, he's going to land more on Santos. So no, I don't think Santos is going to get the better of Said Nurmagomedov in the striking. Wrestling. Does Santos take Nurmagomedov down? Well, look, Nurmagomedov's got good wrestling defense. More importantly, he's got some of the nastiest front chokes in the game. So if Daniel Santos does try and shoot a takedown, I've got a funny feeling Said Nurmagomedov's going to wrap a neck up because Santos isn't that high-level wrestler that's going to be able to shoot in and before that neck gets wrapped up, be lifting Said Nurmagomedov sideways and dumping him into like a half guard or side control. That's not Santos's wrestling game. So I think if Santos does shoot in, Nurmagomedov's going to wrap up a submission, a front choke, and submit him. And then when it comes to the grappling, like I say, I think, maybe top side Daniel Santos has got a, good grappling advantage from a submission perspective. Maybe, again, I feel like I'm clutching at straws here, just trying to be positive in somewhat about Daniel Santos. But I think that, the wrestling's not going to be there anyway. And even if it is, Santos is going to be put in a bad position, in my opinion. But let's just say Santos does get Nurmagomedov down and gets on top of him. Well, I think Magomedov gets back up to his feet. It's not Said Nurmagomedov's first rodeo. It's not like we've got a Shara Magomedov here that's still learning the ropes within the grappling. I just don't see any area of this fight where Daniel Santos has a tremendous amount of success. I think he's outmatched striking, wrestling, and I don't think he's outmatched wrestling and grappling. I just think the defense of Said Nurmagomedov's wrestling and grappling is better than the offense of Daniel Santos's wrestling and grappling, which then leaves you into a striking fight where I think that Said Nurmagomedov is levels above Daniel Santos. So yeah, for those reasons, I'm picking Said Nurmagomedov to win this fight. And in the next fight, plenty of offs on this card. We've got Magomedov versus Brunno Ferreira. Now, when I went into tape of this fight, I actually went in thinking I liked the underdog in Brunno Ferreira, but actually the more I watched of this fight, the more I liked Magomedov. And there's a couple of really simple scenarios. Like with Brunno Ferreira, for a start, like he's only been out of round one, I think, twice in his career, to like 12 fight career, and both of those times were on the Brazilian regional scene, both round two. So he's never seen a round three, and he's pretty much finishing every fighter in round one. Now, for me, that's an instant red flag, because at this level in the UFC, at some point, those round one stoppages are going to stop. And also, what I mentioned in the introduction with the UFC gloves as well, the knockout and TKOs are a lot less now with these new gloves. So, maybe that adds into that point as well. The bottom line is, at some point, you're going to fight an opponent that's going to match your skill for skill and or be better than you, that's going to drag you into a round two and into a round three. And we've got no idea how you handle that. And even Brunno Ferreira doesn't. Yeah, he might be able to go, hard rounds in the gym for 3 rounds, no problem, but it's a completely different scenario when you're in a fighting situation and someone's trying to knock you out on the other side and beat you. So we don't know what Ferreira is going to be like late in the fight. And then when you watch that Dustin Stoltzfus fight, yes, Brunno Ferreira managed to knock Stoltzfus out, but Brunno Ferreira, he wasn't the bully in that fight. Stoltzfus stood his ground, pushed forward, and Brunno Ferreira didn't like being on the back foot and not being able to bully his opponent. And because of that, he started tiring out. He started to get a little bit desperate. He started with the spin attacks, and granted, he did end up knocking Stoltzfus out with one of the spin attacks, but you could see the cardio visibly disappearing, and he started getting desperate with low percentage strikes, which again is red flag number 2 for a fighter that's never really been out of a round one in a super competitive fight. So I believe that if Stoltzfus had weathered that storm against Ferreira and got him into round 2, Brunno Ferreira would have been that tired that Stoltzfus, I think, would have took over, got takedowns, and looked good against Ferreira. But of course, he didn't weather the storm. In comes Magomedov. Magomedov last time out against Warlley Alves. Warlley Alves is a big, powerful Brazilian with legit BJJ, with power in his hands, and Magomedov completely nullified him. There's a lot of similarities between the physique and the style of a Warlley Alves and Brunno Ferreira, and Magomedov has just completely and utterly nullified that style in his last fight. So I think he's going to be able to do the same thing against Brunno Ferreira. Magomedov, there's been a slight knock on him because I think he was overhyped when he came into the UFC, which is not his fault. He fought Sean Strickland, lost. Then he fought Caio Barrao, lost. Look, Sean Strickland's a former UFC champion. Caio Barrao's probably fighting for a title next. So these are two fighters. He's fought way above the level of Brunno Ferreira. And yeah, he's not passed those tests, but we know where his ceiling is now. He's not going to be a UFC, or it's unlikely he's going to be a UFC champion. But I definitely think he's like top 10, top 15 quality, whereas I don't think the same for Brunno Ferreira. I think that Magomedov has absolutely got to be careful, mind his P's and Q's. Ferreira comes out hard, but I think if Magomedov makes him work, and especially shoots takedowns or gets the trips, gets Ferreira down, makes Ferreira get back up to his feet, takes him down again, I think if this becomes a cardio battle, I think Magomedov wins that battle. And the other thing that I've not even mentioned as well is, and it's a good point, I've not mentioned it all in the podcast, is we're in Abu Dhabi. Every single time we're in Abu Dhabi, we always get the reports from the broadcasting team, John Anik, DC, Joe Rogan, all those guys. We always get the reports of how hot it is inside the arena, how they're sweating already, and these fighters have got a fight in it. And again, that if Brunno Ferreira's got the cardio issues, the heat's going to zap that as well. So yeah, look, I think Magomedov has got a good fight ahead of him here. He's just got to not get knocked out in the first round, and I think he'll be okay. For those reasons, I'm picking Magomedov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Chris Barnett. Huggy Bear is back on the card. I hope everything is okay with Huggy Bear. He's supposed to have fought Junior Tafa, not last weekend, the weekend before, and he had to pull out because of the hurricanes in Florida. There was something in Florida that his family was affected. So I hope everything's okay with Chris Barnett's family. But there's been a bit of a switcheroo with the Tafa brothers again, because of course Junior Tafa needed a new opponent, which he got one. But then Justin Taffer was supposed to fight Kennedy and Nzechukwu this weekend, but then Justin Taffer's pulled out, so now Huggy Bear, who was supposed to fight Junior Taffer, is now replacing Justin Taffer, so we've got that Taffer switcheroo happening again. And look, I think that, look, I said it on the last podcast that I broke down with Huggy Bear. I absolutely love this dude. He's an absolute vibe. He's also more athletic than what anybody gives him credit for. When you look at him, he just doesn't look athletic due to his physique, but the dude will kick you in the head if you're not careful. He's a ton of fun fighter, a real vibe. Like I say, I love Huggy Bear, but I think Nzechukwu is going to be a big problem for him. And it's no surprise that Nzechukwu is a big favourite in this fight as well. You know, the height, the reach, the length. I think Barnett's going to be working overtime just to get into the range of Nzechukwu and land on him. And I just don't think those moments are going to be too often. I think they're going to be few and far between, and I think Barnett's going to really struggle to land on Nzechukwu. And whilst he's struggling, trying to close the distance, and Nzechukwu is just going to be racking up volume, accumulating damage. So yeah, I think it's, as much as it pains me to say, I think it's a tough one for Huggy Bear. I'd love nothing more than for him to, you know, jump off a cage and head kick Nzechukwu and in the head and knock him out and get a spectacular KO. But I just don't think this is the fight for it. I think Nzechukwu either finds a late finish here due to accumulation of damage, or the volume approach just carries him over the line for a 3-round decision. So for those reasons, I'm picking Kennedy and Nzechukwu to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Farid Basharat versus Victor Hugo. So in my opinion, it's another simple breakdown here, because I think that Basharat's got a really good fight ahead of him. Victor Hugo's had a few opponents in the UFC. I haven't got the exact number of opponents up on my screen, but I know that he's had a number of opponents and he's had a number of cancelled fights already. So let's see if he makes it to this fight. Well, I think he's even been on the scales before and the fight fell through. So yeah, look, let's see if he actually makes it inside the cage. But Farid Basharat's a tough fight for Victor Hugo. I'm not sold on Victor Hugo being of high quality yet until I see him in the UFC. Obviously, he's had a good regional scene in Brazil, but again, we've been through that, we've covered it already. You know, the regional scene in Brazil is not the UFC, and he's certainly not Farid Basharat. Basharat's so good everywhere, good striker, good wrestler, good grappler, and Victor Hugo is going to come forward, he's going to swing hard, he's going to be aggressive, and he's going to come forward at 100 mile an hour. So Farid Basharat has got to mind his P's and Q's early, but if Victor Hugo overextends and comes forward too hard, it wouldn't shock me to see Basharat just level change, take him down. You know, again, he'll just have to be careful of the early arm bars and triangle attempts and all that stuff, but I don't think Basharat gets caught with the submission from Hugo off Hugo's back. He's too good for that. The level's too good here. And like I say, I think that once the fight calms down a little bit, we'll see Basharat really start going through the gears and just picking Victor Hugo apart, and then I think it'll just become a dominant victory. Whether it's a late finish or whether it's a comfortable unanimous decision on the judges' cards, I don't see Victor Hugo making his UFC debut in Abu Dhabi and beating Farid Basharat. I really don't. So yeah, for those reasons, I'm picking Farid Basharat to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a real good one here. We've got Rinat Fakhretdinov versus the newcomer, Carlos Leal. Now, Fakhretdinov was supposed to fight Nursultan Ruziboyev. Ruziboyev pulled out, and there was a little bit of speculation about who was going to replace Ruziboyev. And the UFC have gone with Carlos Leal making his UFC debut. Now, Carlos Leal is a fighter that's been in the PFL Global League. He's fought UAE Warriors. He's a really, really good fighter. Now, at the moment of me breaking this fight down, I don't see any betting lines for this fight yet. However, I'm very intrigued to see what Carlos Leal opens at, because if this is a big number on Fakhretdinov and the book, because look, the bookies will open the line and then the public create the settled line. Because look, say if the bookies open this at a pick'em and then everybody bets on Fakhretdinov, Fakhretdinov then settles at minus 250. That's not the bookies that have opened Fakhretdinov at minus 250. But let's just see where the bookies open this, because if the bookies and the public together overrate Fakhretdinov and Carlos Leal is sitting at like plus 200, plus 250, plus 300, if that's a big number on Carlos Leal, well, there's going to, I think, from the sharps anyway, I think there's going to be a lot of interest there, because Carlos Leal is a really good fighter, solid fighter. He's got a good Muay Thai base, knees in the old school Thai plum clinch. He's got hard leg kicks. He's got knockout power. He'll switch stances. He's also got good wrestling defense as well. He can defend a takedown. If he's taken down, he can get back up to his feet, which is going to be key in this fight. And honestly, he's not just one of these like random newcomers that's been put in there that Fakhretdinov is, or the opponent's going to run through him. Like, he's a legitimate fight. This is a legit signing for the UFC. Like, it's a really, really good signing. I'm quite excited. But from Fakhretdinov's perspective, you know, we've spoke about Leal, but Fakhretdinov's still a beast in his own right as well. You know, he's got good power, he's got good wrestling, he's got good heavy topside grappling. And for me, it all depends on how prepared that Carlos Leal is. I'm pretty sure he was preparing for a fight potentially this weekend, or maybe it was last weekend in UAE Warriors. So he's probably had a full fight camp. But again, it's a bit different to having a full fight camp fighting on a UAE Warriors to fighting on a stacked pay-per-view UFC card against someone like Rinat Fakhretdinov. So it all depends on how prepared Carlos Leal is. I also don't know what type of opponent he was preparing for. If he was preparing for a striker, then he might not have the wrestling preparation in this fight. And again, it is short, regardless of what anyone, the opportunity itself is short notice for Carlos Leal. Now, the one question mark, the one knock on Fakhretdinov that I think everyone's going to have is that draw against Zaleski dos Santos. Man, like, he dominated the first 2 rounds, as you'd expect him to, but then cardio fell off a cliff. Zaleski dos Santos took over, 10-8'd him, at least on 2 judges' scorecards, he 10-8'd him in that. Zaleski 10-8'd Fakhretdinov in that final round and got a majority draw. So Fakhretdinov, there's definitely a red flag been planted because of that fight. But again, you sort of have to give fighters the benefit of the doubt until you see things multiple times. Like Fakhretdinov, until I see that again from him, I'm not going to hold it too much against him. But I think Fakhretdinov, again, he's not going to have the technical striking of Carlos Leal, although he's got the power to keep him, you know, to get respect and maybe keep the fight relatively competitive on the feet. But I do think the wrestling and grappling is going to play a factor. And like I say, it all just depends on how prepared Leal is. If he's prepared from a wrestling perspective, I think he's probably going to stuff the takedowns and beat Fakhretdinov. But I'm having to side on the side of Fakhretdinov because I just think that Fakhretdinov is dominant with the wrestling and grappling. And even if Carlos Leal is super prepared, I still think Fakhretdinov has some success in that type of game plan. It's just the fight gets close. But if Leal's not prepared from a wrestling perspective, I think Fakhretdinov could have his way with him. So yeah, look, like I say, I'm super intrigued to see the betting lines here because I kind of feel, look, if this ends up like a pick'em or maybe Fakhretdinov's a slight -125 favourite, then I think there's going to be a lot of value on Fakhretdinov. But I think if Carlos Leal's like a +200, +250 underdog, then I think the value is going to be on Carlos Leal. So I'm wondering whether we actually see the sweet spot here, whether it settles in the sweet spot where maybe Fakhretdinov's like a -180 favourite, 190 favourite, where it's not too attractive, and then Carlos Leal might be like +150, where that's not that attractive on the other side as well, and then it just turns into a pass. So I am wondering if we see that complete sweet spot there. But yeah, look, if it goes one way or another, there could be value on either side. But from a pick and prediction perspective, I have to trust the fighter that's got that UFC experience, that has been prepared for this type of fight on this day, on this card. And for those reasons, slightly siding with Rinat Fakhretdinov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ibo Aslan versus Rafael Cerqueira. And that's if I've pronounced his name right. Could be Rafael, could be anything else on the surname. I'm not too sure. There is a reason why I'm not 100% sure as well. And it's a little bit of a conspiracy, actually, because, look, at MMA Play 365, we run the tape index, and we have done for years, where, you know, it makes tape studying easier for gamblers, professional gamblers, coaches, analysts, anybody that needs to watch tape. And basically it's just, if you've never heard of the tape index, every single event for like UFC, PFL, Bellator, Cage Warriors, we have the full card on there, and we have direct links to all the fights available on the internet for that specific fighter. So we don't host those fights or those videos, they're all external links, but we find the links just so you can go from one link to the next, make things super easy to watch tape, and between fights you're not spending 5-10 minutes looking for the next fight. You know, it just keeps everything clean, makes your tape studying more efficient. So with Rafael Cerqueira, we were looking for the tape, myself and Sean, DFS Sniper for those that know him, and we found one fight of Rafael Cerqueira. Now, it turns out that the majority of Rafael Cerqueira's professional career is fought under a Brazilian promotion called Demo Fights. Now, Demo Fights doesn't have its own YouTube channel per se, so you go on Demo Fights Instagram and it links the YouTube channel where all the events are. So Demo Fights actually do a good job of recording, which a lot of Brazilian promotions don't. So they've got the majority of the events that they've had at Demo Fights. They've got every single fighter on every single card that they've recorded, apart from the Rafael Cerqueira fights. So even on the cards where Cerqueira is fighting, they've got the rest of the fights but not his available to watch. The one fight we did find was just on a random YouTube channel. Someone's recorded it from somewhere else. So Rafael Cerqueira's fights on demo fights, it just doesn't exist, but every other card and every other fight does on every other card. So I think what's happened is, I think Rafael Cerqueira and or his team have asked Demo Fights to remove the YouTube videos publicly, put them private, so the UFC can still watch the links that they get sent to sign in based off what they see, but so nobody else can find the tape, so there's nothing on him to really study from an opponent perspective. Quite smart. So that's because why? Why else would Demo Fights have all their events, every fight on every event, apart from the Cerqueira fights? Why is that the case? Which makes it a nightmare from our perspective for Tape Index, because the fights just aren't there. But then, even from the gambler's side, watching tape on Cerqueira, like, the one fight that we've got ended in round 1. I saw little bits, and look, from my perspective, I can my background's within striking personally, so I can spot a good striker with certain traits and characteristics. I can spot a good striker or a poor striker or an okay striker within a couple of minutes, which I feel like I've been able to do with Cerqueira, but it's still not a strong read. But anyway, from what I've seen of Cerqueira, I think he's quite low volume. I've not seen too much within his speed, his movement, and how he attacks to say, actually, this guy's an elite striker. I think he's an okay striker, a striker that probably gets more off on power than he does technique, and that's what's made him successful to this date. But like I say, the volume's quite low. He will attack with big action strikes, low percentage strikes, and try to, burst with them every now and again. But I'm just, from what I've seen, look, I'm not 100% confident because I haven't seen enough. But from what I've seen, I think he's going to be serviceable. Now, with Ibo Aslan on the other side, Aslan, I had question marks and red flags on Aslan before his last fight. Can he go 3 rounds? Well, we don't know. What's he going to like facing a high-level competition? And he fought Anton Turkalj. It was the second time he fought him. He lost to Anton Turkalj in Brave. And he has a decent round 1. After round 1, he starts slowing down, and we're thinking, right, now we're seeing the gaps in his game in regards to the cardio and going late. But to be fair to Ibo Aslan, he bit down on his mouthpiece, he dug deep, he found a second wind, and he ended up knocking Turkalj out in round 3, even though he was clearly tired. And he was already up before round 3 as well. So Turkalj, again, is an opponent that, I don't think he's going to be in and around the UFC for years, but he's definitely a good fighter. And if Ibo Aslan's doing that, I think that's cleared up some of the red flags. I'm still not 100% sold on Aslan. We still need to see that wrestling and the grappling, but, he's training at Extreme Couture. He's close with Sean Strickland. And there was a video going around on Instagram as well of Strickland talking to Aslan at the end of the fight camp saying, look, there's nothing else you could have done. You've done everything you possibly can. You've lifted, you've trained, you've sparred, you've listened. He said, you've done absolutely everything. And then Aslan responded with, look, I know you all want me to knock him out or something along those lines, but I've worked that hard on my wrestling and grappling, I'm going to submit this guy. So Aslan seems to be developing his game as well, and I know talk's cheap and we'll see inside the cage, but out of the 2 fighters, I know that Aslan can now produce in a round 3, even though it's not pretty or spectacular. He can knock fighters out in round 3. I know that he's got good training partners. I know that he's got world-class coach, and I know that he's prepared. Whereas with Rafael Cerqueira, I've just not seen anything that overly excites me. The best work he's done is on the Brazilian regional scene, and I think he might be one of these fighters that comes in that is a heavy hitter and just isn't at that level of a UFC fighter maybe just yet. But then that's the other thing, he's like 34, 35 years old as well. He's coming down from heavyweight to light heavyweight. Again, there's a lot of question marks on Cerqueira. I know more from Aslan, and that's the side that I'm going to trust. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ibo Aslan to win this fight. And the final fight to break down, we've got Brunno Silva versus Ismail Nordiev making his second stint in the UFC. The UFC have re-signed him. Before I get into the analysis, actually, a really funny, dumb moment that some people might have a little bit of a laugh about. When I was looking into this fight, I watched Ismail Nordiev, watched the tape first. Obviously, he's been out from the UFC, so I needed to know what he's been doing, in between that time and him being re-signed. And then I'm looking at Nordiev and I'm thinking, man, Brunno Bulldog's going to knock Nordiev out. Brunno Bulldog trains with Henry Cejudo. He's got good power. He's just knocked out Cody Durden. He's got a good wrestling base, good grappling base. I thought, I like Nordiev. And then, of course, I look into Brunno Silva, who's fighting Ismail Nordiev, and realise that this isn't actually flyweight. I was just having a really, really, I would say maybe tough morning that morning. But this is actually Bruno Blindado Silva. 5 weight classes heavier than what Bulldog Silva is. So, yeah, maybe you'll find some amusement in that. Look, we all have tough days. But look, from what I saw of Nordiev, I've always had a soft spot for Nordiev, and I've got no idea why. I really don't know. I couldn't tell you. I just really like him as a fighter. I think that, he's got some good skill sets, and he's got a good skill set, some good qualities. But you look at him outside the UFC, I think he had 7 fights. He went 4-3, which isn't spectacular. And even in his last 2 fights where he lost, he was getting dropped, he was getting hurt. And I think it's a concern for Nordiev. Nordiev seems to be a really good fighter when he can be offensive, when he can be the hammer, but when it's his turn to be the nail, I have some question marks on him, I really do. And look, with Brunno Silva, I don't think Silva is at a stage anymore where he's this young, aggressive striker that's going to run through. Remember, this guy went to a decision with Alex Pereira when nobody could go to a decision with Alex Pereira, and still most fighters struggle to go to a decision with Alex Pereira. But Brunno Silva did. And if it's that Brunno Silva, that version of Silva, I think he knocks Nordiev out. But I don't know. You look at Silva against Chris Weidman last time out, it just wasn't impressive. That Weidman fight should have been a fight where Brunno Silva really went in there, put it on Weidman, knocked him out, and just showed him where the levels are currently at in the UFC, and it wasn't like that. Weidman did really well against him, and I know it ended up in a controversial fashion with the eye pokes, but man, Weidman looked good against Brunno Silva, and this is a Weidman that is long gone of anywhere close to where he was in his prime. The thing is with Ismail Nordiev, it's hard to really trust him as well, because even when he's looking good in moments in fights, he's still getting hit and dropped. It's a tough one, this. I'm actually going to side with Nordiev, because I do think that I just don't like how Brunno Silva was with Chris Weidman. Ismail Nordiev has got more about him than the current Chris Weidman, and that's where I'm sort of basing it at. But I'm not overly confident, and Brunno Silva still packs power. He still hits fucking hard. If he hits Nordiev, he could absolutely knock him out. So, yeah, not sold on Nordiev with the defense and the durability, but I think the offense is probably enough here against a Brunno Silva that was just really disappointing against an older version of Chris Weidman. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ismail Nordiev to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. I know it's been a little bit longer, but we've got a phenomenal card this weekend, and some of these fights are, in fact, pretty much all of these fights are just outstanding. I genuinely cannot wait to watch this card. I've spent more time on the breakdowns and analysis, so if you don't like it, you can skip through the parts that you don't like, and just maybe scroll to the end to see the prediction, I suppose, even though I do sometimes spoil the prediction earlier in the breakdowns. But yeah, is what it is. I've enjoyed breaking it down, really enjoying watching, or really going to enjoy watching the card on the weekend. And like I say, for those that are tuning in and listening, thank you very much. Always appreciate you tuning in and the support. If you're listening on one of the podcast platforms and you want to jump onto YouTube, maybe to drop a comment in the comment section, tell me who you're betting on, tell me where we disagree, then you can do so. Jump over at youtube.com/MMA Play 365, and I do try and get back to all comments every single week as well. So again, always appreciate the support. And one very last time, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then you can do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got subscription packages for every type of gambler, and it's all included in one subscription as well. So it's not as if you have to purchase multiple subscriptions, everything in one subscription. It's super affordable because our ethos is we want you to make the money back that you've spent with us as quick as possible so you can start profiting on the bets and the betting advice that we provide for you. So yeah, everything's super affordable. Everything's in one place. We don't charge multiple subscriptions for different types of betting advice. Everything's in one place for you. That's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.